Namaskritam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Sarasatim Vyasam Tato Jayoti Ishtaparayashu Bhadresu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Atamashoki Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki Nigamalka Padurgaritam Pharam Shukamakaramita Dhabi Samitam Ivata Bhagavatam Rasham Arayam Mahora Hora Sikabhugi Bhakam Krishna Sadama Bhagate Dhammagini Karonashta Dishamasha Panadako Dunodidam Tamapi Adabhishuta Vishutam Vibhu Samyapiarena Virampiduksharam Prakyahiduhu Mahoradinam Sanklesham Nirvana Musanti Nanyataham Anaito Pashamam Shakshan Bhakti Yogamaloka Sijana Chakra Sattara Samidam Atmanamastamuni and the Granti Korbanti Itam Bhuta Ganahari. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinubandhu Jagapati Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kantanamo Stute Jayatam Surito Pango Mahamanir Materigati Matsaveshaparam Boja Radha Namaran Sriman Rasa Rasaram Bi Vamsi Vana Karsan Venershan Vika Gopanta Sri Sanam Divyad Vrindarani Kapadrubara Sri Maratnagara Shima Sanasto Sri Sirada Shida Govana Prestadavi He Sarvamanush Manami Namo Brahmanidabaya Go Brahmanitaya Chajigaritaya Krishnaya Govindaya Mangalam Bhagavan Vishnu Mangalam Gurudajita Mangalam Panadikaksho Mangaraya Om Narayana Vidmahi Vasadevaya Dhimahi Tano Vishnu Prachodhyate Om Mahadevi Cha Vidmahi Vishnu Paditi Dhimahi Tano Lakshmi Prachodhyate Mahalakshmi Namastubhyam Sare Sare Hari Priya Namastubhyam Namasyam Tapti Kanchana Gaurangi Hare Vindavanesha Vishabhani Sute Devi Pranamani Hari Priya Nama Om Vishnu Paraya Krishna Prasnaya Bhutare Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tanamani Namaste Sarasati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nir Vishesha Sundibari Praskata Desatarine Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sari Gaur Bhaktavindam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Thanks for jumping in, by Bobby. I'm smiling at her emojis there. She was up before me. I got up at 5 o'clock, took the bird upstairs. Every once in a while, I let Ramu spend the night with me. He enjoys that. I take him upstairs and put him in his cage around 5 when I get up. And I looked up by Bobby's art studio and the light was on. I thought perhaps the light had been left on overnight. And I went up there to turn it off, and there she was, painting away. So good morning, bye Bobby. Suprabhatam. Jean, good morning. And Brent, good morning. From where we left off yesterday, we talked about how one sincere, heartfelt cry for help to Krishna, coming even from a subhuman, like an animal or a monkey, or an uneducated living being, like a Jamil, can take us more towards Krishna than 1,000 steps taken in pride. And this is something insidious that full-time devotees have to guard against. And we're working hard from early morning to late at night, arranging the deity worship, greeting guests, cooking for the buffet, making flower gardens, organizing festivals, doing so many things. And that pride is going to tend to sneak in, that I am doing so much for Krishna. And as I mentioned yesterday, we're never going to stop doing. We have to do, because the doing itself will take us to where we want to go. But in the doing, we have to come to the point of realizing that I'm not the doer. I may be doing, but I'm not the doer. Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita that the senses, the 5 senses, are like 5 horses. The mind are like the reins. The body is like a chariot. The soul is the passenger, and the super soul, the expansion of God, is within our heart. He's the driver. The driver is the one who has the reins in his hand. The driver is the one who expertly controls the horses. The horses are not controlled. The whole kit and caboodle goes over a cliff and meets with disaster. So it's actually the super soul is the driver. We're not the driver. We're simply dictating to Krishna, turn right, turn left, in the same way that Arjuna was dictating to Krishna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Krishna was his chariot driver, and Arjuna was saying hard left, hard right, fast forward, full stop. And Krishna was complying with the orders of Arjuna. Similarly, Krishna, we don't do anything, but we have desires. We want to raise our arm. We want to speak something. And Krishna, as the driver, enables all of that. Were we not to have Krishna's sanction 1,000,000 times a day, we wouldn't even be able to tie our shoes. We wouldn't be able to throw the covers off of ourselves and sit up in bed. Krishna is the doer. Prakriti kriyamanani gune kamashahankarasi. Now, that's not to mean that you do nothing, you become passive. Krishna is the doer, I'm not the doer, so I'll just sleep. No, it means you go ahead and do, but you do fully cognizant that you're simply requesting Krishna, may I drive, may I speak, may I cook, may I clean. Krishna, please sanction that my limbs, my sense of seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, comply with a sincere drive to serve you in a multitude of ways. Now, in all of the doing that accomplished devotees may be engaged in, there should be this undercurrent. Help, Krishna, help. I can't give this talk without your blessings. Krishna, I can't lead this kirtan without your blessings. Otherwise, you can do everything correctly. A guest comes, you smile, you greet him, you inquire about them, you show them around, you give them a tour, you take them through the buffet, you explain what the items are, you check back with them, is everything okay? Do you have any questions? You can do all of that. You can do everything expertly, perfectly, according to the highest level of courtesy and hospitality. But in the end, Krishna has to move those people from within their hearts. Krishna can see through their eyes, and he can sense from within their heart what it is that you're doing to bring them closer to Krishna consciousness. But don't forget, he's also in your heart, and he knows whether you're putting on a show, whether you're doing what you do in pride or whether you're doing what you do in humility. And it's only when you do what you do in humility that Krishna then, in the heart of the guest, in the heart of the recipient, brings about those dramatic changes. So we have to go ahead and do the best we can to help people on their journey to Krishna. And that begins with greeting them at the door, smiling, welcoming them, letting them know that we're glad they came. People don't come through the door of the temple by accident. Krishna's guided their steps, especially in this day and age, with all the transportation we have, planes, buses, trains, cars, skateboards, motorized scooters, electric bikes. We can go at good speeds in all the 10 directions of the compass. If people have options, if someone decides to come to the temple, that is a huge thing. That is Krishna directing those person's steps. And we have to worship Krishna by receiving guests properly. Just before we jumped into this, Rob joined me, and he'd just been to Denver this weekend on a business meeting, and he stopped in at the Denver temple. It was a wonderful congregation, a good spirit, a lot of great chanting. It happened to be during the Shnan Yatra of Lord Jagannath. Rob's never been to the Denver temple. He's a face that nobody's ever seen before, and that must have obviously registered with the devotees themselves. And yet, sad to say, not a single devotee walked up to him, welcomed him, smiled at him, and acknowledged that Krishna, from within Rob's heart, directed his steps to the temple. In a sense, not receiving a visitor is disrespecting Krishna. So however gorgeous you do the Shnan Yatra, and however nice the kirtan, however nice a lecture is, if you're not asking Krishna for service, Krishna, how can I with sincerity be a guide to people on their journey back to home, back to God? Someone said the greatest prayer that you can ever say is, help, Krishna. I saw this new face walk through the door. Now help me, Krishna, to touch something within his or her heart, at the very least, to make them feel welcome. So they've asked me to lead the Tulsi prayers. Krishna, help me to pray to Tulsi with heartfelt sincerity. They've asked me to cook the Sunday feast. Krishna, help me to cook everything so it's nice, tasty, and delectable. All the ingredients just right. Not too much salt, not too little salt, not too much chili, not too little chili. And then offer it with genuine gratitude, genuine love in my heart, so that people will taste the devotion with which this prasadam is offered. You know, we do so many things. We have an international society with 800 centers, and there are a multitude of activities, from music to art, to worship, to cooking, to gardening, to guest reception, to giving classes, to cleaning. And the key to success in all of these endeavors lies not in the externals, not in the amount of physical work that we do, but it ultimately lies in the attitude, in the motivations, the reasons why we do what we do. So Gajendra went from being totally intoxicated, totally in Maya, in illusion, having bought into materialistic sense pleasure. As soon as that crocodile began to latch onto his leg, at first he took it as a minor annoyance. He still had that enjoying spirit, and he took that crocodile's attack as a minor annoyance. He tried to flick it away. But far from being successful in flicking it away, the crocodile was very persistent. The crocodile had the advantage because the crocodile was in the water, and that wasn't the strong point of the elephant. Gradually, as time went on, Gajendra's consciousness went from being a gross sense enjoyer to being a gross sense enjoyer with a little bit of inconvenience. First, he thought it was no more significant than a mosquito bite. But then as the crocodile prevailed more and more, Gajendra began to wean himself from this mental predisposition to sense enjoyment. His consciousness got alarmed, got stressed at the prospect of his sense enjoyment drying up. And in doing so, he recalled the devotional service that he'd done in a previous life. And so the whole journey, the whole flow of the Gajendra story in the 8th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam is from Gajendra's consciousness being pinpointed, limited on matter. Then there's an attack to that matter. So his consciousness has to acknowledge that our sense enjoyment is not unobstructed. In fact, if you're enjoying unobstructed sense enjoyment at the moment, I'm putting you on notice, it will soon be obstructed. It will too come to an end. We mentioned a few sessions ago the irony that if you're aware of the law of karma, when you're happy, you should be unhappy. And when you're unhappy, you should be happy. Why is that? Because when you're happy, it's just a temporary respite, because the nature of this material world is strife. The nature of the material world is misery. So if you've got a moment of happiness, you should actually be unhappy, because you know that in quick succession, sooner than you'd like, unhappiness will follow happiness. That's the nature of this material world. Dukkha shukkha, dukkha shukkha. Happiness comes, followed by unhappiness, followed by happiness. If you're unhappy, you should be happy, because whatever negative karma you're experiencing is exhausting itself. It's running its course, and in its wake will be happiness. This is the waves, the ocean of material sense gratification. Sometimes you're up on the crest of a wave, and sometimes you're down in the trough. It's the nature of this material world. So Gajendra's happiness, euphoria, elation was impinged upon by the jaws of the crocodile. He came to a higher level of reality, knowing that happiness is temporary. Unhappiness is also temporary, of the same nature. Tasaiva preto hete kovido. We don't necessarily try for misery, but it comes. It just comes of its own. So we don't similarly have to try for happiness, because it's also going to come as its own. Waxing and waning, karma and akarma, just the elements of material life. when the crocodile opposed Gajendra for no real reason at all. Crocodile had its own food stuff. It was in the water. Crocodile himself was immensely strong. As Gajendra was the king of the elephants, he was the king of the crocodile. He didn't need to attack Gajendra. He attacked Gajendra unsolicited, out of the blue. And in all of that, Gajendra, instead of asking, why is he doing this? This is so unfair. Coming from a point of life is about sense gratification. It's my right to have sense gratification. No one should impinge upon, no one should intrude upon my sense gratification. Gajendra reverted to his Krishna consciousness of a past life. And as he did so, his consciousness expanded from that pinpoint of sense gratification and that pinpoint of mild annoyance at the intrusion of the crocodile. And that incident, that life or death situation, catalyzed a recollection of his previous life. And during all of this, his consciousness begins to expand. And he remembers. He's starting to come back to his original, true spiritual nature. And he's seeing that the attack of the crocodile, being unprovoked, is not a function of karma, but it is actually Krishna personally coming to him in the form of the crocodile, because Krishna loves him too much to allow him to continue literally rutting in sense gratification. Krishna appears before Gajendra as an implacable enemy, out of the blue, you might say, because Krishna loves Gajendra too much to let him sit, soak, and sour in the current mode of consciousness. And Gajendra, to his credit, rather than having a pity party, rather than crying foul, rather than saying, poor me, oh my gosh, he reverts to his previous sober consciousness as Indraduna Maharaj. And he recognizes that the crocodile coming into his life is not so much a function of karma. It's not so much a reaction of a deed of his previous lives, but it is Dharma. It is the Lord's direct intervention. And seeing this as a dharmic event and not a karmic event, Gajendra goes beyond the immediate cause. He doesn't identify the crocodile per se as the cause of his suffering, but rather he identifies the crocodile as a representative of the Lord, come to bring an end to his suffering, come to wake him up from the illusion in which he's currently ensnared. People who are on a trough, they're on a high of sense gratification. Everything's going their way. Everything turns up gold, and they can do no wrong for a certain season of their lives. What they've done is, in the prison house, in this world of repeated birth, death, disease, and old age, they've improved their position temporarily in the prison. You may be in a prison in a class C cell with bread and water, and after some time, due to good behavior, they elevate you to a class B section of the prison, where now you have a little better food and you have an hour to walk and exercise around the yard. And then after some further time, you may be elevated to class A part of the prison, where you have television privileges, better food. You can have people, they'll allow people to bring you gifts from outside. So the person in the class A section of the prison thinks that my life is perfect compared to the person in the class C section of the prison. But the objective gain for that prisoner would be to get out of the prison altogether. So Krishna loves us too much to get us to class A prison status or class B prison status. He wants to get us out of the prison altogether. There's nowhere in the Srimad Bhagavatam where any encouragement whatsoever is given to elevating oneself to the heavenly planets, to worshiping the demigods, and going to live for hundreds of thousand years on the planet of the demigods. There's nowhere that demigod worship is encouraged. In fact, just the opposite. Kamas tastyoti ganaha prapadyate. Those who surrender and worship the demigods for elevation to the heavenly planets, their hearts are polluted by material desires. They worship the demigods with lusty desires in mind. Look at Gajendra. His place of recreational activity did not take place on this earthly middle planetary system. He was sporting with his she-elephants near the Trikuta mountain in the heavenly planets. He was already in the heavenly planets, and look at what happened to him. Even in the heavenly planets, death stalks you, disease stalks you, enemies stalk you, old age stalk you. Krishna doesn't want you to live anywhere where you're being stalked. He wants you to live free from stress, free from anxiety, free from birth, death, disease, and old age. And Gajendra, as his consciousness expands, comes to recognize that the crocodile is not his enemy. The crocodile is his friend. The crocodile is not coming to him as a negative karmic reaction to end his sense gratification. The crocodile is coming to him as an opportunity sent by Krishna to end his suffering altogether. Now think again, back to the Kurukshetra war, the teachings of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. First chapter, particularly second chapter, Arjuna clearly indicates that he does not want to fight the Kurukshetra war for the purpose of taking revenge on the Kauravas. He had every right to. Kauravas had offended him and his brother in many, many ways for many, many decades. We don't have to go over the list of offenses. You're all well aware of them. And the Pandavas had every right to get back at the Kauravas, to take revenge for all of the atrocities that they had perpetrated on them. And yet from the very beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna shows himself not in the least bit inclined to rise to the provocation of the Pandavas' criminal, aggressive activities against them. He shows himself just the opposite. He reveals a saintly nature, a nature of detachment, that he does not want to shed blood in order that he and his brothers enjoy an earthly kingdom. What to speak of the blood of his teachers and his cousin brothers? Gradually, Krishna brings him around to the way of thinking. You're not asked to fight against the Kauravas. That's not why we're going to do this. To fight against those who opposed you, to give a shove back to their push, action and reaction. This is not about karma. Krishna says, Arjuna, you're very correct not to want to fight this battle for karmic reasons. You're very correct not to identify the Kauravas as your enemies, not to take the bait, not to take the immediate cause as reality, but the remote cause. You're very correct to see that you're not being asked to fight against the Pandavas, but you're being asked to fight for the cause of righteousness and justice. That's the difference. Karma means tit for tat, to get back to on your enemies. Dharma means to take your enemies, the enemies coming against you, as an opportunity to rise higher, to step into the fullness of your destiny, and eventually qualify yourself to go back home, back to the spiritual world. The whole flow of the Gajendra pastime, as well as the pastime of Dhruva Maharaj, as well as the pastime of Ajamil, is that their consciousness had shrunk to their enemy, to their death, to that life and death situation in which they were placed. But in that seed, in that critical situation where they had no more family or friends or relatives or wives on whom to fall back, Krishna knocked all of the crutches out from underneath their arms. They came to the point of realizing that they had nobody to turn to, nobody to assist them, nobody to rely on, save and except the all-powerful Lord Krishna, who's in the heart of the living being. In all of that, their consciousness began to expand. Their consciousness began to expand. And so the whole story of many, many of the devotees in the Bhagavatam, when we come upon them, they're not perfect. They've made mistakes. They've gotten off track. But Krishna sends them an enemy, a challenging situation, which then awakens their consciousness, their original primeval Krishna consciousness, and their consciousness starts to expand. It's like a child. A child wants to experience everything through the mouth, more so than smelling, hearing, seeing. Child wants to experience everything by putting it into its mouth. This is extremely limited, pinpointed consciousness. But as a child's consciousness expands a little bit more, he might at some point want to experience more visually, more orally, more tactile. He wants to expand with the other senses, but he still has that strong, fierce sense of possessiveness. No one else should play with my toys. If his consciousness expands a little more, and hopefully it does, he'll come to the point of of getting pleasure from sharing his toys, not just always getting pleasure from himself being the enjoyer, but experiencing a higher sort of pleasure by sharing what you have and passing on the joy and pleasure to others. And as one hopefully gets more and more mature, one works on behalf of one's family members. At a further state of maturity and evolution, one may work in a humanitarian sense to help the poor, to educate people, to bring them out of poverty. And as one conscious, as one's conscience expands, one may work being sympathetic to all living beings rather than limiting one's welfare philanthropic work to members of one's own species. In one's conscience expands to include all species. One doesn't want any living being. Sarvabhavantu Shukana, Sarvabhavantu Naram, Sarvashantu, Sarvabhadrin Pashanti. One wants all living beings to be happy. And in this way, consciousness expands. The example is giving you throw a little petal in the middle of a pond, and the ripples expand, and they keep expanding, they keep expanding, they keep expanding, they keep expanding. But at the point they come to shore, they come to rest at the land, they stop expanding. They reach their furthest point of expansion. Similarly, consciousness tends to expand throughout our life as we mature, as we evolve. The ultimate consciousness, the ultimate expansion of consciousness is to see that there is nothing. Aham sarvasya prabhavo matav sabam iti matvajanti Buddha bhavasam. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, I am the source of all material and spiritual world. The wise who know this worship me with all their heart. This represents the ultimate perfection, the summum bonum, the last expansion of consciousness. It comes to rest at the lotus feet of He from whom everything comes. Now we have, if you're from India, you have, when I used to go to India in the 70s, the comic books, the stories of Gajendra and Prahlad and Dhruva and Ajamil, they were all on racks in the airport terminals, and they were shrink wrapped, and you could buy the comic books for a few rupees and pass your time while you're waiting for your plane, reading the stories of Gajendra and Bhima and Bhishma and Karna. All that information has been around for thousands and thousands of years. The stories themselves are well known. But the lessons behind the stories, the nectarian charanamrita, drinking which one's consciousness expands to its ultimate potential, that has to be given not just by an illustrator, not just by a storyteller, not just by a hired person, but one must receive that from a practicing devotee of the Lord. And that is Prabhupada's immense and unique contribution. The stories have been there for thousands of years. Everybody from India is aware of all of the stories of Durvasa, the stories of Ambarish Maharaj, the stories of Prahlad. But Prabhupada's contribution is that he's giving us the deep bhakti insight. He's giving us the bridge, bhasi understanding. having lived at the Radhadar temple for 9 years, having followed the footsteps of Jiva Goswami, Rupa Goswami, Sanatan Goswami, who were themselves disciples of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the whole weight of the disciplic session, descending from Brahma himself to Narada, to Vyasadeva, coming down through the ages. Prabhupada, when he touches this knowledge, when he touches these stories, he brings them alive. He brings them alive in a way that no other academic or non-devotee could possibly do. Prabhupada had not passed on those stories with his own Bhaktivedanta purports, none of us would be doing what we're doing right now. We would all, in all likelihood, be doing something else right now, something unmentionable, something unthinkable. We're together on this Zoom call. We gather on Sundays in Spanish Fork and Saturdays in Salt Lake City and in Denver and in Philadelphia and in New York and Atlanta and in London. They just had a big Rath Yatra there. All these devotees under the umbrella of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness are all congregating and discussing about an elephant who is divinely empowered as an expression of Prabhupada's Brijbasi realization and compassionate vision. Without the pin code, without the key of the Bhaktivedanta purports, we would be nowhere near Dharma, nowhere near the intimate secrets of Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada is giving us the mood of Radharani coming down from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And that's why it said that without accessing Lord Chaitanya in disciplic session, nobody can properly understand the pastimes of Radha and Krishna, because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Radha and Krishna combined. He is seeing everything from the eyes of Radha. So we have the Bhagavad Gita, which is A, we have the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is B, and we have the Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is C. We have the Bhagavad Gita, which is primary school. We have the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is college level, and we have the Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is postgraduate. Through Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, is the combined form of Radha and Krishna, we get access to the true meaning behind the pastimes of Radha and Krishna. And even so, even getting all the mercy of Lord Chaitanya through Srila Prabhupada, Bhaktisiddhanta, Bhaktivinoda, even though you know, and I know, if we're honest with ourselves, we still have a lot of challenges from Maya, from material nature. We still have a lot of flirtations with ignorance. Even with all of that supporting us and protecting us, imagine where we would be without Prabhupada. And that's why it says, Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya, Narayanam Namaskritam, Naram Chevanana, Bhagavan Sakti, Itam, Nitya Bhagavata Sevaya. One should hear the Bhagavatam, not just from an academicist, not just someone who's paid to write cute, instructive, moralistic, Aesop's type stories, but we must hear Bhagavatam if we're to be ultimately benefited from someone who practices Bhagavatam 24 hours a day. When the speaker gets up on the Vyasasana and speaks about Krishna, Radha for 1 hour, that's not a show. That's not that the speaker is thinking about and doing other things. And for 1 hour a day, he kind of pulls it together and makes a show speaking about Radha Krishna. No, who ascends the Vyasasana and gives a class in Krishna consciousness should be one who is Nitya Bhagavata Seva, who is practicing Krishna conscious 24 hours a day, thinking of Krishna. So when they sit on the Vyasasana, it's just what they're doing all the time. It's nothing special. It's just what they're doing all the time. Therefore, it is said, Avaishnava Mukodganam Putam Harikaram Shavamaina Sarpachishtam Yatapadam. Do not go to hear from non-Vaishnavas who speak Bhagavatam for money, who speak Bhagavatam or ascend to the Vyasasana for name or fame or acclaim or recognition. that's going to spoil the whole thing. Only learn Bhagavatam from a high-class Vaishnava, from someone practicing 24 hours a day. Told this story before. I had met devotees in 1970 and gotten first initiation sometime in 1970. And then later on that year, or early in 71, I forget, Prabhupada gave me second initiation by sending me, no, he gave me first initiation by sending the beads. I hadn't met Prabhupada. I did not get first initiation from Prabhupada personally, but he sent my name in a letter and he sent beads that he chanted on. Well, when he came to Australia in 1971, he gave me second initiation in person. So we were all excited about Prabhupada coming to Australia for the first time and our meeting him for the first time. And I had obviously been reading his books, such as they were, Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, the Macmillan version of the Bhagavad Gita. But I always wondered what, the person was like. I compartmentalized. This is the work. Now, what is the person like? That in the world of novelists and fiction, a person has their life, but then they have this made-up life, which comprises the plot and the narration and the characters of their book, and prolific authors, during their career, 67 years of writing, come up with all kinds of personalities, all kinds of related subordinate characters. They may have a series. They may have the series of Jack Riker, for instance, and then they have another series and another series. So there's always this dichotomy between the person who lives, in New York City with 5 cats and his hero, who's kicking the butts of bad guys right, left, and center. So I just had this training, and I wondered, here's the work, what's the person like? And Prabhupada came to Australia in 1971, and he spent 4 days. I was in charge of everything at that time. So I was with Prabhupada for most of that time, except when he was sleeping. And I was amazed that he was non-different from his books. He was the living, walking, speaking personification of the books. There wasn't, we come home from a really good public program attended by hundreds of people. Prabhupada gave a wonderful lecture. The questions were good. The kirtan was good. There was a tendency to be really, really elated about that. Our mission is taking root, our mission is being successful. And sometimes in the wake of a triumph, in the wake of something done really well, you kind of feel a little sense of entitlement, and you want to kick back, take a break from the intensity of it all, and talk about something mundane, or think about something mundane, or read something mundane. But Prabhupada was the same. He was actually the same, whether it was before a program, the result of which was uncertain, or whether it was after a program which was resoundingly successful. Prabhupada did not have those highs and lows. Neither was there a time when he ever sat back and talked about anything mundane. For those 4 days, nothing came out of Prabhupada's mouth that wasn't a direct quote or an explanation or a paraphrase from the Bhagavad Gita, the Srimad Bhagavatam, or the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So you could not be in Prabhupada's presence morning, afternoon, evening, alone, or with a crowd, with non-devotees, with devotees. There wasn't any time or place that you could not be in, that you could be in Prabhupada's presence and not be exposed to the full power of 100% Krishna consciousness coming down from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And therefore, there are statements that says, if you're not a follower of Lord Chaitanya, you obviously cannot realize what Lord Chaitanya realized. Lord Chaitanya realized the prem, the sweet, super excellent love of Radharani for Sri Krishna. This is Dharma as opposed to karma. Dharma, in the end, means to understand Sharupa Siddhi. It means to understand that my true nature is as an eternal servant of Krishna. My true body is not this material body of flesh and blood, Caucasian, Afro-American, Mexican, Latin, Asian. My true body, my true Sarupa Siddhi, is a spiritual form. I was originally created in this spiritual form to serve the Creator, to love the Creator, and to be loved by the Creator. This is my purpose in life. Now, Srimad Bhagavatam does not encourage any compromised position within this material world. Srimad Bhagavatam does not encourage us taking another material body, even if it's the body of a demigod. The Srimad Bhagavatam discourages yogic practices for elevation to the yogic planets. The Srimad Bhagavatam discourages scholarship for the sake of it, knowledge for the sake of it. The Srimad Bhagavatam kicks out everything that is not related ultimately to your reclaiming your Sarupa city, your eternal spiritual form, going back to the eternal world of bliss and knowledge, and re-engaging in the service of the lotus feet of Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Time is up. I mean, we never really set a time limit, but it just seems that once I get going, it's usually about 45 minutes until I run down. So we followed the same pattern today. Let me see here. First off, Brent jumped on, and Jean, then by Bobby, who's upstairs painting as well as listening. Shukshma, Hare Krishna. Shali, Hare Krishna. Carmen, Hare Krishna, good morning. Yes, all praises to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you, each and every one, for joining us at this midpoint, Transcendental Tuesday, which lies after Motivation Monday and before Wisdom Wednesday. We'll relish, savor more of the nectar tomorrow. Speaking of nectar, what fresh insights do you have for us, Rob, after a weekend in Denver and after sitting in on this particular class?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Good to be back.
Okay.
So I got Maya will get you before she's through. Crying for Krishna is all you can do.
That's very good. Wow.
No need to try. Misery is always close by. Krishna as the crock will break the lock.
Good.
Don't go for class A or B. Go for Krishna and be free. It is no game. Books and the guru are one and the same.
Nice. Well, look forward to posting those today and continuing this nectarine discussion tomorrow. Thank you, one and all. Please pass your day thinking of Krishna, serving Krishna. Whenever there's an opportunity, chanting his holy names. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Rama, Hare Hare.